Leonora Hale climbed the windmill every evening as the sun began to lower itself behind the western hills. The ritual had become as natural as breathing. She tied her skirts tight around her legs, wrapped her fingers around the cold metal ladder, and ascended rung by rung while the wind whispered through the open plains. The windmill groaned softly beneath her weight, its blades turning with a patient rhythm that matched her own steady heart. From the top, the ranch spread out before her, like a worn but faithful map. Fences cut clean lines through the tall grass. The barn roof caught the fading light, glowing warm and familiar. Beyond it all, the land stretched endlessly, rolling into distant hills that blurred into the sky. This view had once belonged to her father, a man who believed watching the land was a form of respect. When he died, Leonora inherited not just the ranch, but his habit of keeping watch. The townfolk talked. Of course, they said she was lonely. Some said she was stubborn. Others claimed she was waiting for something that would never come. Leonora never corrected them. Up here, their words didn't reach her. The wind took everything she didn't need and carried it away. She watched, because watching made her feel anchored. Because if she stopped, the quiet would close in on her completely. The windmill was proof that time still moved, that the land still breathed, even when her days felt too still. That evening, the sky burned with deep orange and gold, streaked with thin clouds that caught the light like embers. Leonora shaded her eyes and scanned the horizon, her gaze moving slowly from left to right. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just grass bending and shadows stretching long. Then she noticed movement where none should be. Far out, near the edge of her land, a horse staggered across the plain. Leonora leaned forward, her breath catching in her chest. The rider slumped heavily in the saddle, his body swaying as if he might fall at any moment. Travelers didn't come this way at dusk, not unless they were desperate or lost. Then the rider lifted his arm. Once, twice, the signal. Leonora's heart began to race. She climbed down the ladder faster than she ever had, boots hitting the dirt with urgency. Dust rose as she ran for the barn. Her hands shook as she saddled her horse, but her movements were quick and sure, guided by instinct rather than fear. She rode hard toward the distant figure, the wind tearing at her hair and skirts. As she closed the distance, she saw blood darkening the man's sleeve, his head hanging low. Just as she reached him, he slipped from the saddle and collapsed into the dirt. Leonora slid from her horse and knelt beside him, pressing 2 fingers to his neck. His pulse was weak, but it was there. Relief washed over her, followed by determination. "You're not dying out here," she said firmly, as if the land itself were listening. With effort, she lifted him onto her horse and turned back toward the ranch. Behind her, the windmill continued to turn, its silhouette steady against the darkening sky. Leonora didn't know the man's name. She didn't know why he'd been shot or who might be chasing him. All she knew was that after years of watching the horizon, it had finally answered her. Gaze and nothing would ever be the same again. Marco drifted in and out of consciousness for what felt like days. Pain came in waves, sometimes distant, sometimes sharp enough to pull a breath from his chest. When he finally woke fully, the world smelled of boiled herbs and clean linen. Light filtered through a small window, warm and steady. Nothing like the blazing sun he remembered collapsing under. He tried to move and failed. "Don't," a calm voice said. Marco turned his head slowly. Leonora stood near the table, her sleeves rolled up, dark hair pulled back. She looked composed, but her eyes were alert, assessing him the way a rancher studies weather on the horizon. "You took a bullet through the shoulder," she said. "Missed bone. You were lucky." "Lucky's not a word I use often," Marco murmured. She crossed the room and pressed him gently back when he tried to rise. Her touch was firm, but careful, practiced. "You'll stay put until I say otherwise." Marco obeyed. Over the next few days, Leonora tended his wound without fuss. She cleaned it twice daily, changed bandages, and made him drink bitter teas he didn't bother arguing about. She asked no questions, and Marco found that silence oddly comforting. He noticed things while he healed. The ranch was neat, orderly, and quiet. too quiet. Leonora moved like someone used to doing everything herself. There was no hesitation in her steps, no wasted motion. At meals, she set one extra plate without comment. At night, she sat by the fire, reading or mending. Never restless, never idle. "You live out here alone?" Marco asked one evening. Leonora nodded. "I manage." Marco believed her. Still, he sensed the weight beneath her calm. Loneliness didn't announce itself loudly. It lived in empty chairs and routines never broken. When he was strong enough to stand, Marco insisted on helping. Leonora protested once, then handed him a task. He fixed a loose gate with one arm, mended a fence post, brushed horses. He worked slowly, deliberately, grateful for the purpose. They talked more then. Marco told her pieces of his story, tracking stolen cattle, crossing dangerous ground, getting too close to men who didn't like being followed. Leonora listened, without judgment. "You could have let me die," Marco said quietly. "One night." Leonora looked at the fire. "The land didn't want you to." Marco smiled faintly. For the first time in a long while, he believed he might have found a place worth staying. Marco healed steadily. His strength returned in small victories, walking without pain, lifting tools, riding short distances. One evening, he noticed Leonora preparing to climb the windmill, as she always did. "You'll go up there every night," he said. "Yes." "Mind if I join you?" She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Take it slow." The climb was harder than Marco expected. The wind tugged at him. The ladder creaked beneath his boots. But when he reached the top, the view stole his breath. The land opened wide and endless. The sky painted in fading gold and purple. "So this is what you watch," he said softly. Leonora stood beside him, arms resting on the railing. "It reminds me, the world is bigger than my grief." Marco understood more than she knew. He had spent years moving, never staying long enough to feel the weight of loss settle in. "You saved me," he said, "out there." Leonora shook her head. "You were already fighting." They stood in silence, the wind wrapping around them. When Marco reached for her hand, she let him. It felt natural, unforced. From that night on, the windmill was no longer hers, alone. Trouble arrived at dawn, carried on the sound of hooves and gunfire. Marco recognized it immediately, the men who had hunted him. Leonora didn't freeze. She armed herself, her movements steady, her resolve fierce. They stood together, backs to the ranch, refusing to yield ground. The fight was quick and brutal. When it ended, dust settled, and silence returned. Marco turned to Leonora, shaken but alive. "They'll keep coming," he said. "I won't bring that danger here." Leonora met his gaze. "This land has known danger before." He realized then that staying wasn't about hiding, it was about choosing. Seasons passed. The ranch changed. Laughter returned. The land thrived. Leonora no longer climbed the windmill to escape loneliness. She climbed it to share the view. One evening, as the sun set, Marco stood beside her. She leaned into him, certain. "I used to watch the horizon," she said softly, afraid to step forward. "And now?" Marco asked. "Now I live in it." The windmill turned steadily above them, no longer a symbol of waiting, but of love found. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western love stories.